Zedek Siu is widely regarded as one of the best writers in tabletop RPGs. I became aware of his work through the Thousand Islands series of system-neutral zines, and later through his blog posts, one of which ended up winning the 2022 Bloggies Award. Siu is a pillar of the OSR and Southeast Asian RPG scene, an all-around fantastic author who I've cited heavily in my essay on Beak, Feather, and Bone. So when I reached out to Siu about coverage, I was pretty cognizant of his impact on the hobby, and wanted to see if there were any of his works he felt didn't get as much recognition. He recommended I take a look at Spy in the House of Eth. The module, created by Siu, Ben Brown, and Zach Cox, is a hexcrawl campaign for the Best Left Buried system, both of which are published by Soul Muppet Publishing. Though it was released in 2020, I found its themes of corporate greed and necromancy eerily relevant to what our world looks like 4 years later. House of Eth takes place on a tropical coastline, with several factions struggling for control of the region. While I recommend reading about the beggar pirates and dugong men, I'm mostly going to focus on the workers of the Weirin Oils plantation. Some history. Samson Eth was what we would call today a tech billionaire. The introductory text tells us he crafted labor automata, and with his necromantic powers, became a favorite of the Duchy of Tora. His machines replaced the workers at Weirin Oils. Now robots harvest cycad seeds, while the laid-off workers have turned to fishing and collect a severance stipend. Eth died 30 years ago, but his legacy persists. That kind of immortality would be enough for most. But at the time the players enter the module, a rebellion is brewing at the plantation. See, automata require more than just gears and grease to turn, but the skulls of the dead as well. That's how the souls get in. Those souls have not consented to this labor. In fact, they hunger and suffer just as they did while they were alive. But because of necromantic wards and welded shut jaws, they lacked the words to speak their agony. Until now. Samson's influence over the church allowed him to dictate health policy, and they made it illegal for bodies to remain uncremated. Meanwhile, church agents would discreetly remove the skulls from the deceased, and then turn them in at Samson's mansion to receive a tidy bounty. As a result, Samson enslaved countless souls. In a sick bit of irony, the laid-off workers of Weirin Oils were forced to take up their tools in death, and work indefinitely for their old boss, just with a significant pay cut. This aspect of House of Eth is what hooked me, that cruel twist of firing people and then forcing them to work for you again, against their will, for free. Siu's evocative and efficient prose supports the theme of exploitation that runs throughout this module, and as players unravel the story through its characters and setting, I think they'll understand why this narrative is so compelling. The concept of using the undead as laborers is older than pop culture's understanding of the undead generally. According to PBS's Monstrum series, when people from West Africa were enslaved and brought to work in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, now Haiti, they began to tell stories of a fate worse than death. They believed that some practitioners of Vodou could capture part of the soul of the deceased and force them into servitude as blank-faced puppets. Zombies. To quote Alyssa Shotwell writing for the Mary Sue, "When normal is a life of enslavement, it makes sense that bondage even unto death cultivated hellish fear. This continued suffering also serves the enslavers, because zombie slaves don't need what little sleep or food is provided to the living slaves. They could just work non-stop. There's no such thing as eternal rest. The cruel and greedy will happily keep you working, even if your heart lies still." The most well-known labor philosopher of the 19th century also did not miss this connection between greed and undeath. In Capital Volume 1, Karl Marx described the contradiction between value and time as a relationship between a vampire and its prey. Capital is dead labor that, vampire-like, only lives by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it sucks. The time during which the labor works is the time during which the capitalist consumes the labor power he has purchased of him. If the laborer consumes his disposable time for himself, he robs the capitalist. The undeath analogy, then, is perfect for this metaphor. If a laborer using free time for themselves is a thief to the value of capital, then the solution is a perfect laborer, one that never tires and never complains, one who can till fields and grind millstones all day and night without rest. A machine of pure efficiency. The only problem comes when the organic materials begin to decay, when sinew tears and cannot will itself back together, when the worker breaks faster than their tools. If only there was a way to retain that perfect work ethic, transplant that subservience into a hull of wood and metal, something that could be welded and polished and sent back to the assembly line. This is what House of Eth accomplished. More efficient than human workers alone, his automata are specialized, designed perfectly for their work in a way mortals never could be. Pickers slice seeds from the field with bladed fingers. Treaders walk endlessly on conveyor belts without even arms to steady their gait. Sorters are permanently fixed to their stations, long fingers selecting choice seeds. They do not need to rest or eat or dream, only continue their labor throughout the night, essentially tripling the output of a business that only runs 8 hours a day. I wonder if Sue realized in 2020 how relevant undead machines would be to the future of labor. If you're the kind of person who watches my channel, you're probably online enough to know what generative AI is. For the sake of definition, however, let's say that when I talk about AI, I'm talking about programs that generate images, texts, video, and other media in response to inputted prompts. In the past year or so, dozens of so-called AI generators have popped up across the internet, including those developed by mega corporations like Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. The rationale for the use of these tools is self-evident. One need only look at the state of journalism to see how this kind of thinking affects industries and ruins lives. One Reuters Institute article describes the benefits of introducing generative AI into the newsroom. Quote, "The most obvious opportunities for applying generative AI to news are in bringing new efficiencies to specific and familiar steps within the existing news production workflow supporting an organization's existing news products." End quote. What does that word salad mean? It means now you can lay more people off. The entirety of the staff of Sports Illustrated was let go in January, following a Futurism report which revealed several of their recent stories were written by text generators, with stock image headshots slapped on the byline. Microsoft laid off some 10,000 employees in 2023, right before it signed a billion-dollar agreement with OpenAI. Even in the tabletop scene, Lynn Kodega, the reporter who broke the news on the D&D OGL license, lost their job last year, following Gizmodo's disastrous flirtation with AI articles. All of this sucks ass and I hate it quite a lot. But the way I draw the connection between House of Eth and AI is not just through automation and layoffs, but the ways in which an AI's intelligence is trained. I don't particularly care about how AI generators produce the material they create, but at this point it's pretty well known that the reason that they're able to create anything at all is by processing gigantic sets of training data. As Lauren Leffer for Scientific American explains, programs called web crawlers and data scrapers seek out text, images, and audio from across the internet and bundle them into large stockpiles. These stockpiles are then acquired by AI companies, giving them access to the fuel they need to power their own labor automata. There's dozens of arguments for why this data scraping is miserable. No one consented to it. This information can include data obtained through privacy breaches, as well as information from hate sites. The list goes on and on. But today, my specific bone to pick has to do with the information used in these models that's perhaps the least objectionable. The information they take from public domain sources. According to Rich Stim of Stanford Libraries, public domain works are those which are not protected by intellectual property laws. Quote, "Anyone can use a public domain work without obtaining permission, but no one can ever own it." End quote. At least in the United States, works enter into the public domain when 1. The work's copyright expires, 2. The copyright owner does not properly renew their copyright, 3. The copyright owner intentionally places their work in the public domain, and 4. When copyright law does not protect a certain type of work. In the US, if a work was created after 1977, the work's copyright is not set to expire until 70 years after the creator dies. However, for works published before 1977, copyright typically lasts 95 years from the year of publication. You probably saw the most recent example of this principle in January, when Steamboat Willie fell into the public domain and people announced a bunch of really boring parody movies and games based on the property. The public domain is an incredible resource. The entirety of the works of Shakespeare, all of Da Vinci's paintings, Every song that top charts in 1928, it's all available for people to study and enjoy for free. And because everyone can access these resources, they're being repurposed in ways the original creators could not have foreseen. In the tabletop scene, public domain works are regularly used for art and layout, as is wonderfully demonstrated by Laurie O'Connell's hexcrawl that works through the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch. In an economic system where corporations are constantly trying to squeeze every penny out of every asset they own, the public domain is a revolutionary concept. At a certain point, things get old enough that no one should own them, that they no longer belong to their creators, but the world at large. But this is the thing about generative AI. It abuses that wonderful privilege of the public domain, hoovering up centuries of words, milling them into vectors, and spitting them back out into emails and Kindle novels. As Alex Reisner reports in The Atlantic, one of the most popular generative AI training sets, Books 1, is speculated to contain the entire text of Project Gutenberg. If you don't know what that is, Project Gutenberg is a collection of 70,000 free ebooks, the majority of which are works in the public domain, painstakingly converted into digital format. Just skimming through their top books of the last 30 days, we get Frankenstein and Moby Dick, but even my favorite play, Ibsen's A Doll's House, and Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper. Isn't it just the peak of irony that among the novels powering generative AI, we get one of the most famous stories about reanimating the stitched-together corpse of several other dead bodies? It makes me want to cry. The words of poets long gone are forced into the machine, their services sold as a boon to those who would maximize their output for the least effort. Why hire a writer when you can have Lord Tennyson's prose at your fingertips? Why pay an artist when you can call Michelangelo's ghost to design your new logo? The devastation wrought by new labor technologies has left its scars across human history, from the cotton gin to the industrial factory. Marx best described the terror automation holds for the working class. Quote, "The instrument of labor strikes down the laborer. This direct antagonism between the two comes out most strongly whenever newly introduced machinery competes with handicrafts or manufactures handed down from former times. But even in the modern industry, the continual improvement of machinery and the development of the automatic system has an analogous effect." End quote. New methods of production rarely ever benefit the people they're supposedly for. This is as true now as it was in 1867. And one of the most cruel things about this whole process is that AI freaks can't just satisfy themselves by pillaging the words of the dead. Their wretched machines demand more fuel. From Phil Hall of the Forbes Technology Council, quote, "The fact remains that the most important aspect of synthetic data is the real-world source data used to train the algorithms that create it. As generative AI continues to become more pervasive and sophisticated, data sourced from the real world, as well as human involvement and feedback, will continue to play critical roles." End quote. It's still people, at the end of the day, that pull the levers of automation. Generative AI cannot produce its own training data, it'd become an Ouroboros. The snake must prey on new works, those that only humans can create. Just like Eth's automatons, these programs are only automatic on the surface. Real people, people who paint and write and sing, are the heart of generative software. Real people have to code and tweak and scrape the internet to weld these machines into any semblance of intelligence. In many cases, humans outright produce the work attributed to generative programs. No matter the promises made by proponents of automation, it is the majority of humans who will bear the brunt of technological change, while the greedy minority stand proudly atop their skulls. This isn't the end point of the generative AI conversation. It's barely scratched the surface. There's plenty of works by dead people that aren't yet in the public domain, but we're still caught up in generative AI training sets, to say nothing of the living people whose words and voices have been stolen. But when I read House of Eth, the disrespect for the dead portrayed by the module's antagonist mirrors the same contempt AI companies show for anyone who dares to think their labor should matter. I'm not saying that all work should be copyright protected for all time, of course, but I am saying we should cherish public domain media the same way you might visit the grave of a grandparent, or light candles for a passed away friend. Because if we don't regard these works as sacred, there'll always be some necromancer ready to loot those tombs. In the beginning of the module, readers learn the rumor that Samson Eth feared dying, that he longed for a way to postpone Hell's judgment. But that is not the truth. Quote, "Here's what you should know. Samson Eth never wanted to cheat death. It is true he was obsessed with hell. He never feared it. He considered it an unconquered market." End quote. That's what happens in the rest of the hexcrawl. You navigate through starfish command posts and chat with the simian residents of Eth's menagerie until you burst from the haze and into the exhaust house, the site of Eth's portal into the 44th hell. There you'll find the corpse of Samson Eth, anchoring the mangrove god She to his body, a grotesque attempt at immortality, sucking up the fumes of hell and pumping them into the clean air above. You might free the god, abort Eth's reincarnation, but the damage has been done. The haze does not clear, and the automata are not permitted to die. The titular House of Eth is the first dungeon Siu ever made, based in part on the Chong Fat Si mansion in Georgetown, Penang. Siu is inspired by the stories of industrialists like Chong, who made their fortunes by stripping the land and then went to spend their ill-gotten gains closer to the imperial core. It is a story as old as exploitation itself. It is a story repeated in the module, a story repeated in increasingly AI-written headlines. It's never really the technology that's the issue, but the people who seek to use that technology to exploit you in innovative new ways. The wealthy have always and will always seek to create financial efficiency by pulling it out of your flesh. They'd prop your corpse up at the millstone, so long as your death spasms continue to turn the wheel. Once the fields lie fallow, when careers and families and nations are choked up by the detritus of their industry, they simply walk away, leaving others to clean up their mess. Spy in the House of Eth is a module about automation and exploitation, about changing times and age-old cycles. It's a gorgeous text, full of anxieties about labor and justice, and what is left when greed transcends this mortal coil. What happens when you reduce people to profitable fumes. And as I read it in 2024, when I see a wave of necromancers reaching back in time to force the dead to fuel their factories, I don't know that the haze is ever going to clear. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate everyone who takes the time to see what I'm saying about tabletop games. If you want to help me keep the channel going, you can send a tip at my Ko-Fi in the video description. But I really want to shout out Pandian Games, Josh Peters, The Ampersand, and Hassan Yangdi for their donations. It's because of their support that I was able to get a new microphone and headset. My old ones were each 10 years old, so if you notice an improved quality in this video's audio, it's because of them. So thanks so much for your generosity. My background picture is Liquefied Image by Adrian on Unsplash, and my profile picture is by Eater Outsider on Tumblr. If you want to find more of my work, I'm at aavoy on Blue Sky, Monster Factory Fanfic on Tumblr, but my main site is aavoy.com, where I talk about games and writing. I also do another podcast that's Mortified the Friendship Quest, where me and my friend Layla do critical media analysis. This month we're doing a romance-themed series of episodes, so check out our conversations about Filari, Pretty Woman, and Something's Gotta Give. Thanks as always for watching. I think there's probably going to be a pretty big gap between this video and my next essay, unless I can get like a short one out. I am going to be starting work on what I'm tentatively calling the most important essay in tabletop RPG history, which I expect to be out in like late March-ish. So check back then when we hit you up in the springtime. Until then, see ya.